6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, good morning there. I was running a little bit behind today. Sorry, I didn't expect to be caught finishing up my exercises, but that does remind me of something I was reading recently from Richard Foster. He was explaining in his book, Celebration of Discipline, that the discipline of study is a major way that Christ transforms us into the person that we were created to be. The problem with that is, I really don't like to exercise. I try to do that workout because now that I'm a little bit older, as you age, your muscle mass starts to deteriorate, and if you want to be a good steward of what God's given you and maximize how God can use you, that also means taking care of your body. But when we look at the facts, we Americans don't do very well. Looking at some of the 2018 statistics that are recommended by the Physical Fitness Guidelines, only 23% of American adults meet the guidelines. Children do a little bit better with 33%, and adolescents actually do worse, 20%. So it's kind of a situation where we know what we're supposed to do, exercise to be fit, eat healthy, but it's a lot of work, and it's no fun to do. And the discipline of studying the Bible to become familiar with the truth, and when we're talking about the truth, we're just not talking about a vague concept. We're talking about the person of Jesus Christ, because he is the truth. This is what Foster had to say. Many Christians remain in bondage to fears and anxieties simply because they do not avail themselves of the discipline of study. They may be faithful in church attendance, earnest in fulfilling their religious duties, but still they're not changed. They may sing with gusto, live obediently as they know, yet the tenor of their life remains unchanged. Why? Because they have never taken one of the central ways God uses to change us, and that is study. And Jesus makes it very clear that the knowledge of the truth will set us free. John 8:32 tells us, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." In John 14:6, Jesus told us himself, "I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." But that requires some work. And Jesus addressed that in John chapter 5, verse 39 through 40. This happened after an incident which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But Jesus says there, to the Pharisees, "You diligently study the scriptures because you think by them you possess eternal life. These are the scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me to have life." Now, shortly before this confrontation with the religious leaders, the Pharisees, Jesus had healed a person. And of course, since he did that on the Sabbath, their holy day, they were very critical of the fact that he would heal this person on the Sabbath. And so he has this discussion with them. And in this discussion, it's very clear that Jesus is not condemning study. He tells the Pharisees that they diligently study the scriptures. They studied the Bible that they had. But they missed the point. They accumulated knowledge, but they missed the truth of Jesus Christ as the Messiah. Foster puts it this way: when we come to the scriptures, we come to be changed, not to amass information. An article that I recently read, it's a special issue of the Art magazine, which of course I get now that I'm over 65. And they were talking about the COVID-19 and some of the things that we older Americans can do. And this Dr. Lang, he is a professor of medicine and molecular microbiology and immunology at Johns Hopkins, University of Medicine, as well as the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And he explains in this article the importance of the immune system. So Dr. Lang is explaining in this article that the immune system requires attention. And regardless of what our health condition is, the most effective thing that we as older Americans can probably do to be prepared to fight viruses like the COVID-19 is to exercise regularly and to help build up our immune system through the way we eat and the way we exercise. But quite frankly, it's a lot easier to wear a mask because then we don't have to change, because I don't like to exercise any more than anyone else. And the same thing is true with studying. It's quite easy just to read. It's a little different to study. Because if we're going to diligent study, the word diligent, one of the definitions at least is, it's to make every effort. To make every effort requires us to look at things a little bit differently when we look at study. And when we look at study, we're not just talking about the lectures, going to a class, reading books, though that's an important part of it. That's probably less than 50% of what we're really talking about when we're talking about biblical or spiritual study, according to Foster. And one of the things that we have to look at, though, when we're studying is it involves some work, repetition, memorization. Those are all very important parts of study, but that takes work. It requires us to concentrate. That means it gets rid of distractions. It requires us then to make sure we have some comprehension by examining what we've read to make sure we really understand it, and then to reflect upon that. And in addition, Foster points out that we need to be studies of God's creation around us, and the people around us, and the relationships around us, and how that all interacts and works together. Because God, as the Creator, is very attentive to detail, and there is so much in creation that reveals Him to us. And the same thing is true in relationships around us, examining those relationships, and whether those relationships are operating out of truth. And again, when you talk about truth, we're talking about a person. We're talking about Jesus Christ. We're not just talking about a vague philosophy. So in our relationships, are we doing what love demands? Are we doing what Christ demands in each situation? That all requires us to be involved in study. And I saw a movie recently that kind of helps put all this into the big picture, but also into perspective. The name of the movie is called The Great Alaskan Race. And in this movie, which happened in 1925, it's based on a true event. And this happened in Nome, Alaska. And right before this, of course, in 1918, as we all know now, there was another pandemic going on, the flu, and it killed thousands of people. And in this particular location around Nome, Alaska, they lost about half of their population, especially among the Native Americans, to this flu virus. But that's been 7 years ago, and the movie kind of takes us there and then moves us up to 7 years later. And this individual, Leonhard Sefla, had moved up to Alaska because he was interested in gold. He was part of the Alaskan gold rush. But he became interested into the culture, and he became very interested in the native culture. And he learned from them and lived with them and learned how to survive in the Alaskan wilderness. And not just to survive, he learned how to thrive. And then, the Alaskan frontier, especially up around Nome, Alaska, can be very harsh and very unforgiving. So knowing how to deal with that environment requires a lot of study and a lot of diligence. And he put in the time, and he fell in love with a Native American woman, and they married. And they were living their dream, basically, until 1918, when the flu virus claimed his wife's life and left him alone to raise their new baby daughter. Now she's 7 years old. We've moved up to 1925. And during this time, prior to 1925, he was involved in dog sleds and dog racing, and he had won the race that they held up in that area 2 times in a row, and he was very good with his dogs. And he always used the same lead dog, Togo. And this dog, though now, in 1925, is 11 or 12 years old. And it's around the Christmas time. And during the Christmas time, they're all in the church doing the Christmas program, and the camera zeroes in onto the doctor. The same doctor that was there in 1918, the same doctor that treated and tried unsuccessfully, in many cases, to treat people with the flu virus. And his daughter, the nurse, was also helping with all this. And he noticed some of the children starting to cough. And you can see this concerned look on his face. And after the Christmas program, he starts contacting parents to have them bring their children in. And he discovers they have diphtheria, which is a disease which they have a serum for, something that's very successful in treating. Unfortunately, they don't have it in Nome, Alaska. And so he gets on the phone and he calls around and calls the governor of the state, and they get the serum and they get it ready to go up there. But you have to remember, we're in December now. The train going to Nome can only get within 674 miles of Nome, Alaska. That's a long ways. And a blizzard is coming. And so they're trying different things, and a person's trying to volunteer to use his airplane, but it's so cold up there that by the time he takes off, his plane is starting to malfunction. He has to turn around and land. And so they decide their only hope is to use the dog sleds. So they set up a relay team of these dog sleds to transport this serum from 674 miles where the train has to stop with it to Nome, Alaska. And the other problem they have is this serum, because of the cold temperature, is going to freeze. And they're concerned about that, but believe if they can thaw it out each night, it'll still have the potency it needs. So they have to travel, they have to find a spot where they can bed down for the night, thaw out the serum, and go on. And so that's what the mushers do. In each of these teams, there's 25 different teams. 150 dogs are involved. And they all go about an average of 50 to 80 miles, except for Leahard Zefla. He has a big stake in this too, though, because his daughter has also contracted the disease. It's very contagious. And for children, it's very deadly because their immune system hasn't developed yet. And he travels 350 miles with his dog sled. And before he takes out on this journey, he's getting all this advice from the different townspeople about how to do this. And most of them are advising him not to use the dog that he's won all these races with, not to use Togo, because Togo is 11 to 12 years old now. And to go in these harsh environments where the rule is generally you never run a dog when it's over 40 degrees Fahrenheit or when it's below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, they're running wind chill temperatures of 80 below during this harsh weather that's coming in. And so they say, no, you need a younger dog. And he says, I'm not going without the dog that I know and knows me. So he takes off with Togo against their advice. And he's able to successfully travel because they know each other, they know the trail. He's put in his time in the wilderness. He's been a diligent student. And so, although there's many hardships they have along the way, he's able to successfully travel that 350 miles to pass the serum off to the last leg of the race, where it successfully arrives in Nome. And at that time, makes world news that the dog sled, a trip that normally takes 24 to 25 days, they did in 5.5 days and saved many lives. And what does it have to do with study? Everything. Because that's the big picture. When we study, we're not just studying to amass information. We're studying to incorporate all the truth that's embodied in Jesus Christ and how we live our life and how we interact with people. And that makes a huge difference on how we can live in this world. And it makes a huge difference in the world. And so I went back just for fun to look at our history as friends. And of course, George Fox, the founder, in 1647, he had that experience because he had been feeling empty inside, and he had gone to priests, he had gone many places trying to figure out how can he have that quench, that soul thirst he had quenched, and nobody could address his condition. And finally, he had that revelation from Jesus Christ himself, that Christ alone can be your teacher. You can have that personal, deep relationship with Jesus Christ. And that was an insight that helped transform the way we deal with our Creator. William Penn, in 1682, He was a contemporary, actually a convert of George Fox, but he went to Pennsylvania to start what was often called the Holy Experiment. He wanted to establish a colony based on truth. In other words, based on the teachings and the life of Jesus Christ. John Woolman, he was born in 1720. He was an American Quaker who spent much of his life quietly but persistently talking about the evils of slavery and working to the abolishment of that slavery. So successful among friends that very few friends owned slaves at all. Long before the Civil War, they had given up that practice. Steve Grellet, he was actually a French person who ended up in America, became a Quaker preacher. They estimate he traveled over 100,000 miles on horseback. He ministered in the 1800s. And he also saw some conditions in a prison in England that bothered him. But that wasn't something he could be called, felt his calling was to do. So he wrote a letter to Elizabeth Fry. And her and her brother John Gurney went and visited Newgate Prison. And that, especially Elizabeth Fry and the women's prison, was so astounded by the horrible conditions, she spent a good portion of the rest of her life working for prison reform and working within the prison itself, because she was a diligent student of the world around her. Not just the Bible, that was important, studying the Bible, but also studying the relationships and the institutions around her. She could make a difference in the world. Levi Coffin. Daryl and Pat Coffin used to attend our church many years ago. This is one of their ancestors. He was billed as being the president of the Underground Railroad. And in 1826, he moved to Indiana. And in Indiana, they estimate at least 100 slaves a year went through his home to freedom. Because again, he saw the truth. And he knew that truth would set us free when we live in that truth of Jesus Christ. The Cadbury brothers took over their father's business in Inglis in 1861. And that was the chocolate business, as you may remember, Cadbury chocolate. But they were not just concerned about making money. Because of their Quaker beliefs, they were concerned about the workers. They got concerned about the workers' housing, their education, their pay, their hours. And they looked at that whole holistic thing of how you treat people because they had embraced the truth. And there's many other Quakers that we could talk about, which we don't have time. But the challenge I leave with you is, do you want to diligently study the Bible? And do you want to diligently study God's creation? Do you want to work out and exercise so that you're able to be used by God? Not necessarily physically, though that's important, but spiritually. Then you need to be involved in the discipline of study. No, it's not easy, but it is, according to Richard Foster, one of the major ways that God can transform us into the person that we were created to be.